Timelessness and operating outside of personality.
Well, in timelessness, you are going to be moving through spaces and spheres that do not operate by time, which means that every moment is an eternal now. So this is hard to conceptualize, but you get it the minute that you're there. So once you're in this space, which is, you know, a mystical space where every aspect of existence is all in one moment. And so all of these timelines, they're not relevant in that way that they are to us as we exist through time and exist in a timeline. None of these things are relevant in timelessness. In timelessness, you are also dealing with things that are eternal, things that are immortal, things that exist beyond time. And so operating outside of personality is when a soul achieves the ability to detach from the role that they are playing upon the earth, which is a fragmented personality. They're able to detach from that and enter into an eternal role and operate from there and not from the personality. So they can set aside the structures that hold together the personality, the beliefs, the systems, the personality, the entire program that the soul carries as that one person in time, and they're able to operate outside of that. Usually this is done mystically or in an out-of-body travel experience type way, but there are souls who achieve this ability while still in their physical awaking form, and those are the ones we call masters, you know, who are able to completely detach from personality and operate from the eternal.
So what is the value of absolute poverty and annihilation?
Well, it depends on what context that you're asking that about. So are we still in the mechanics of existence?
We are, but we're coming to the end.
Right.
So
The value, you're talking about the valley of absolute poverty and annihilation?
The value.
The value of it?
The
Okay.
value in the valley of.
Well, there's both. You know, the valley of absolute poverty and annihilation is the state. This is, you know, this is actually something that was laid out by Baha'u'llah, the prophet of the Baha'i faith. It's the station of dying from the self and living through God. Every religion has this concept. They just call it something different. But in Baha'u'llah's words, when a sincere lover and agreeable friend attains to the meeting of the beloved and desired one, a fire is enkindled from the radiance of the beauty of the beloved and the heart of the lover, which consumes all coverings and veils. So what is the value of that, Brian? The value of that is that all that is irrelevant, all that is unnecessary, all that is frivolous is burned away as dross in the fire of love that we have towards the beloved, the great lover, God, our eternal love. You know, the goal of every mystic, and in every mystical text that you will read, no matter what religion, is that they are seeking this union with God. And they often speak of it as a lover seeking their beloved. You see this in the Song of Solomon in the Old Testament. This is Baha'u'llah, who, you know, is a Baha'i mystic. You'll see it in the writings of the Sufis to a profound degree. The bridal mystics cover this in a very, very sensual way. Some people have had difficulty understanding, well, why is it spoken of like this? And it's, well, because first of all, who is love? It's God. Who created love? It's God. And so the very journey of the lover seeking the one that they love to the greatest height of ecstasy and oneness and union, that journey is unequivocally shown to be there in every tradition, spiritual tradition around the world, mystically, because this is what mystics are seeking, is this union with God. We don't realize that the unity that we can experience on earth is just like many things in creation itself, is a model, a different, smaller model of the greater model from which it sprung, from where it began, from whence it was born. And so that's what bridal mysticism is that every mystic is seeking that divinity, that divine union with God, because there is no ecstasy or bliss that is greater than this.
And so it's a mystical union.
It is a mystical union. However, when the lover or the mystic reaches this union, you will see that they carry this with them, even when they're in the physical, much of the time. Not all the time, because we also know that there are dark periods, there are dry periods that are normal parts of the mystical and spiritual life that everyone will experience as well. But part of that journey is this union. And again, that's where the hammer of mysticism is leading. It's leading the soul to this oneness, this, let me get the right wording that we put, unitive consciousness. This is the ultimate union with the ultimate lover. And, you know, for those who are uncomfortable with that, I want you to deal with it, because this is what you have to really go for and understand, is mysticism is about reaching more and more deeply into this deep, loving heart of God. That is why it's called ecstasy, samadhi, bliss. You know, there are aspects of the journey that can be compared, and this is why the whole book Song of Solomon is about, you know, to the uninitiated reader, it reads as if it's about a man pursuing the great love of his life. To the initiated reader, it reads as though the soul is pursuing the great God of all creation, the one great love affair between God and man, the great journey that we are all on, which literally confounds, defines, and opens up the meaning of all these other aspects of our existence, all our other relationships, when we seek out this union first. because we don't understand. We don't know what love actually is until we know what love is in God. We understand different lower forms of love that are tainted with karmic issues and limitations and cultural and other biases and restrictions and things that are placed upon human beings by the nature of our misunderstandings. But we only truly know what love is when we know God, because God is love. And when we want to take a soul to understand this, I want people to understand that everyone says God is love. But I want you to understand what I'm taking you further than that. God is love. He is that. He is the very emanation of love. And for us to fully understand how love in its purest and perfect emanation exists and may be manifest, we have to experience it from God. And when we do, it completely transforms everything else.
And
If
so,
we allow it to. If we allow it to.
okay. And so, in regards to mystical theology, how do we use that in relation to mystical union?
Mystical theology is a fantastic tool, because mystical theology is basically the science of the soul. It is the science of the purification of the soul. It's, it's the way and the means by which we can learn to identify and examine our own soul. And it takes us much deeper, much quicker. We accelerate the process because it's like, because you are literally, I used to crack jokes with my kids about talking to my dead friends, because that I'm talking to, when I'm reading The Ascent to Mount Carmel, I'm talking to St. John of the Cross. When I'm reading The Way of Perfection, I'm talking to St. Teresa of Avila. When we are reading books like one of my favorites that I talk about a lot, The Spiritual Life by Father Adolf Tanqueray, you have these people who are deceased from this realm, but whose living words still remain. And we're literally sitting face to face with these masters as they hone in on what we need to look at. And they help us to go through the purification process, piece by piece, bit by bit, and they take us up those stairs.
So let's get into some tools a little bit here. So in regards, how do you delineate between lucid dreaming and astral travel? And let's also talk a little bit about surrendering to the eternal when we are doing astral travel and lucid dreaming.
Okay. Well, with I'm going to change your question just a little, just because we've talked about astral travel versus out-of-body travel before. Astral travel is third and fourth realm travel primarily. Out-of-body travel involves multidimensional travel. You're not just dealing with the astral realm, you're traveling in any of the infinite numbers of realms. And so what is the difference between lucid dreaming and out-of-body travel? Lucid dreaming is dreaming. There is sometimes what I would call an element of a spiritual dream. So it's important. People know when they're having an important spiritual dream. And when you have one, you should take note, write it down, and write in your journal or however you do that. the difference is when you have a fully conscious out-of-body experience, you will know it and you won't have to ask anybody whether or not you had one, because it's that powerfully conscious. A lot of people will have experiences that will start happening where they may start having instructive spiritual dreams, and they may not go over to the fully conscious out-of-body experiences right away. Sometimes maybe not at all, and that's okay, because if however you're being instructed is instructing you and helping you to move forward, you go with that and you trust that. So it, you know, the form, the tool isn't the truth. The truth is the truth. So however the truth is delivered to you, whether it's by a lucid or spiritual dream or through a fully conscious out-of-body experience, it is of equal value. And, you know, there are reasons why we may, you know, may be given things at different levels of consciousness. There's always, some people are going to do better to not have the experience in a fully conscious way. And so we trust our spiritual teachers with that. They know what we can handle, and we trust that. And we can continue striving towards becoming more and more conscious, but we don't need to focus on that being the end all, because literally the vehicle, out-of-body travel or dreaming, is a vehicle. It is a vehicle to attain to the truth. As long as you are being instructed, it doesn't matter what the vehicle is, just, you know, just receive the instruction.
So with lucid dreaming, with my experience, whenever, and even the books that I read about it, it is like kind of like becoming active in your dreams.
Yes.
So the last part of that question was surrendering our will to the eternal, because in
Yes.
lucid dreaming, if we're just, you know, like, okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go over here, and then, hey, that looks kind of cool over there. And then we're missing, you know, because there's a fine line. Yes, we are there. We can make choices, but also being, what kind of advice do you have for people in regards to walking that fine line between being open to eternal guidance and not just making it about self-will?
Well, you know, there will be times when you will be directed or not directed to just do something of your own accord, try to control something yourself. But for the most part, the initiate is going to do the best by surrendering to the will of God and allowing the spiritual teachers to direct your experience, because you do not know what you need to learn or what you need to see. And we don't even know what is the next initiation that we actually need. You know, so we are relying on them to take us to the next level. If we relied on ourselves to do that, we would probably not get there, because we don't even know what it is most of the time.
There's a couple of books that you mentioned. One in this chapter was the Caballian.
The Caballian, yeah, okay.
Caballian. Can you just touch upon that book a little bit, and then also the Book of Enoch, which was from
Oh, sure, yeah. So
one at
the
a time.
Caballian is an ancient book of Hermetic teachings, and it's not a really long book, but it's considered a pivotal, important, ancient Hermetic text. And so it has some, like, it's kind of like a mix between Kabbalistic and Hermetic teachings. The Book of Enoch is one of my favorites, because Enoch walked with God, and anyone who walked with God is someone I want to listen to what they have to say. But of course, in the Book of Enoch, he had these profound visions, mystical experiences, out-of-body experiences, where he was taken to the heavens, hells, and purgatories and shown all of these things, many details about, you know, the way that the heights worked, the way that the valleys worked, and the way that the lower regions worked. That is something that all of us can benefit from. He had very extended apocalyptic type visions into these realms, and about, you know, good and evil, and the places that he called the valleys, which in some respects is a little bit like purgatory, but still different as well, you know, from what many of us have experienced.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I'm sure we might touch upon those later on. But you know, there's a lot of modalities out there like Reiki and Akadawa and many, you know, wonderful healing modalities. And so often you'll get attuned to these, right? I'm going to attune
Yes.
to the mastership level or whatever. So you talked about in this chapter about energetic attunements and also influx.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you can touch upon those.
Well, energetic attunements are similar to what you're referring to, and that's true. Like in Reiki, you'll go through attunements, except in the initiations, you're going to go through attunements that are specific to whichever process you're going through at the time. So you're going to be receiving these in the spirit world through different processes. The other one was, what was it? Attunements, and then the other one?
Influx?
Influx. Yeah, you're going to experience influxes and inflows of various types of energies that you either need to process through your spiritual body, or that you need to integrate into your spiritual body. And sometimes it's stuff that you need to learn how to read. You need to learn to read these energetic influxes, because you're going to start utilizing this in terms of reading souls, reading the types of things that you pick up from people's energy. There's a whole bunch of reasons for these influxes. Sometimes you're going to go through influxes that are going to actually be giving you an influx of something that you need to discard, and you're just going to get an influx of more of it than you'd like, so that you really get why you need to get rid of that energy. And then you're like creating an impetus to get rid of it, so you can feel that this is a really negative thing. You don't want to hold on to it, even if it is just this much, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so you're going to have a variety of reasons for it, but especially during the initiations, there'll be influxes and inflows of energy to teach, guide, instruct. You have to learn how to process, integrate, reform, and also push out.
Okay, so when you get over to this side of the screen, then your audio kind of goes
Which
out.
side? Which side?
Yeah, right where you're at right now, closer to Jesus. Just get
Okay.
closer to Jesus.
I'll stay close.
Stay
I can
close
do
to
that.
Jesus and Buddha. So what you're talking about with these attunements and these influxes. So when we're going through atonements and resolutions to those atonements, then it makes us more open to these influxes.
Yes. 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 Because, you know, we go through atonements, which are where we experience other events in our lives with other people that need resolution. They're not necessarily huge purification events, but they need to happen, and we need to get those taken care of and moved out of the way.
We can even think of it as like the intestines a little bit.
Yeah.
Be a little blockage here or there, and it might not seem very significant, but one little thing can block the flow of energy.
Yes, it can. Absolutely.
Now, in regards to energy, so can you tell me a little bit about fluid, energetic, and conscious recall?
Fluid, energetic, and conscious recall. Yes. So when you're dealing with conscious recall, look, I'm going to go backwards just like you did.
I'll do it.
So conscious recall, you're just able to, on a conscious level, recall things that are necessary to recall. Then there are souls who will be able to touch into an energetic stream of recall, And then the fluid recall is something that is an even a more heightened sense of recall, which is going to happen in higher grade initiation, where the soul is able to almost like flow like a river through the stream of the, you know, humankind's memories. So you want to be able to you want to be as close to the fluid as you possibly can, because this is where you are moving with all levels of recall. Conscious is kind of blocking you in, where you're only remembering certain things. There is conscious recall in terms of, okay, if someone's remembering certain things in the mystical sphere, that can be conscious recall, that's good. But when you're talking about conscious versus energetic versus fluid recall, the fluid recall is going to be the most heightened. Energetic is someone who's able to bring things energetically back. A fluid recall is someone who's kind of like always in the stream, you know? And so those are the ways you want to be moving towards where you're able to stay in that stream of consciousness that allows for fluid recall.
Okay, so you talked about in this chapter mediators and mystics funneling higher potential through 0-point energy. And so I'm just curious, what does that mean, 0-point energy and funneling these higher potentialities?
Well, let me just make sure we're talking about the same thing.
Because I want to funnel higher potentials through 0-point.
Okay. So what I meant was, you know, a 0-point energy point is when, I'm going to speak about this in the mystical sense, try to bring in the quantum understanding of it, which will be, you know, different because I'm a mystic, not a scientist. But 0-point energy is when the energy reaches the lowest possible point. Like a vacuum has sucked the energy out of a space. In the mystical sphere, when all the energy has been sucked out of a space, that's when creation becomes possible, because you've removed all of the elements that are filling up the space that would resist a new creation. When that energy is cleared out, that's when you would bring in a new construct. So you had mentioned this 0-point energy, but what was it in relation to again? I'm trying to make sure I'm on the same.
Funneling higher potentials.
Right. So that's what it is, that you would be funneling higher potentials into that momentary vacuum. And so you're taking advantage of this moment where you've cleared out the energies that are of the old, and you're filling it with higher potential energy with the hope that it will take hold in that soul and bring them to a birth point of higher consciousness.
It kind of reminds me of the quote by Suzuki about the beginner's mind.
Mm-hmm.
Having that 0-point, you know, just like, okay, I'm totally open, man, bring it in. But if it's not at 0-point and, you know, it's filled up with all this stuff, it's like not as much stuff can get in.
Well, what happens is, it's just like if you're looking at, let's just say, a swimming pool, and if it's full of water, it's hard to introduce an entirely different substance. But if the pool is empty and you want to introduce a completely different liquid form, then you can, because there is nothing to fill that space. But when the space is filled with the old, it is harder to introduce something that will be new without it just being overcrowded, and it just becomes a kind of a, you know, cacophony.
Mm-hmm.
You see?
Yep. So this is interesting. Subconscious realm of man has 12 great centers of action and 12 presiding entities or egos. And so when I read that, I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to ask Marilynn about that.
And where are you now? Let's see where you're at. You're in chapter 1, right?
We're still in, I believe we're in the mechanics of existence, but it might not be. It seems like,
Okay.
because we did touch upon lucid dreaming and astral travel, and so I would think that we'd be in chapter 1, mechanics of out-of-body travel, but I didn't write it down in my notes to delineate that, so I'm not exactly sure. But whatever
Okay.
it was that we just talked about, it's next. So everything
Okay.
I ask you is mostly in order.
Mostly in order. Okay, cool.
Mostly except back.
All right, so tell me that again. Tell me that again. What?
Mostly except backwards, because we're starting at the end and going to the beginning. So, subconscious realm of man has 12 great centers of action and 12 presiding entities or egos.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So 12 great centers of action, 12 presiding entities or egos.
Okay. So let me just, since you don't know where you are, let me pull this file up and do a search real quick.
It's interesting though that it's 12, because there's also 12 powers of mind and gateways.
Oh yeah, 12 is a significant number. There's 12 disciples, there's 12 tribes of Israel, there's 12 all sorts of things, you know, and so that is something we find. There's also the 12 is in relation to the ethers, the spheres, and the emanations as well. And so all of these are relevant. Let's see. Okay. Okay, and so this is coming from a quote from Charles Fillmore in 1930. And ironically, here we go. It's talking about the same things that I was talking. You know, so subconscious realm in man has 12 great centers of action with 12 presiding egos. And when Jesus had attained a certain soul development, he called his 12 apostles to him. What he says here, this means that when man is developing out of mere personal consciousness into spiritual consciousness, he begins to train deeper and larger powers. He sends his thought down into the inner centers of his organism, and through his word quickens them to life. Remember, we talked yesterday about the word and what that really means. So here he's talking about how his word quickened them to life. Where before his powers have worked in the personal, now they begin to expand and work in the universal. Does this make sense to you?
Yeah.
And so, ironically, that this is the first and the second coming of Christ as spoken of in the scriptures. The first is receiving the truth in the conscious mind. The second is the awakening and the regeneration of the subconscious mind through the superconscious or Christ mind. So this is Charles Fillmore, and 1930, the 12 powers of man. And so he's speaking of these deeper recesses of the soul where all of these elements are delineated into the 12. I'm trying to figure out why my video is now minimized and I can't see you. So let's see, what would have caused that? Huh. So
Magic.
would it be this? That worked. Okay, so he's speaking of there being these 12 centers and there's 12 egos. Again, this reflects back to vices and different things. You know, we know that we talk about the 7 primary virtues and vices overall, but in reality, there is a whole kit and caboodle of work that we can do through mystical theology on vices and virtues. We talked about natural and supernatural virtues in our previous discussion, that these are now just being further delineated by him to show that we have these 12 different centers of ego that the man will now have to then conquer to reach all these different spiritual attainments. And so we are, we're going to be conquering these egos through the initiations.
So is like the 12 egos the same as the 12 powers of the mind?
No, I mean, there probably would be 12 powers of the mind, but the 12 egos would be things that they're defined by, you know, an ego is a false self. It is a self that is identified with a personality, a self that is identified oftentimes with a misperception, something that is false. So these 12 egos wouldn't be powers of the mind. They would actually be inhibitors, you know, but the natural man would see them very possibly as powers of himself. The supernatural man would look at them as impediments, as things that must be understood, overcome, and overturned. Because the egos cannot survive the initiations into the mysteries. They have to be transformed entirely.
So we are definitely in chapter 1. Out-of-body travel, the mechanics of out-of-body travel, because I'm looking at the next things. Can we talk about gateways, corridors, multidimensional portals, and vortexes of energy? Starting with gateways and corridors.
Well, you're going to have, ironically, a lot of those things on your list. These are all methods and modes of travel in the initiations into the mysteries. So gateways, corridors. Gateways are more likely to appear in the sky above you. Corridors are going to more likely be various types of tunnels. Go ahead and tell me some of the others there.
We have multidimensional portals.
Multidimensional portals can literally be things that are almost invisible to the naked eye, but if you just slip from one spot to the next, you're going to be traveling into a multidimensional portal. Those can be anywhere. They can be in the physical realm as well. People have them in different places. These are all modes of travel through the initiations into the mysteries. Go ahead.
Vortexes of energy.
Vortexes are places you will travel through quite a bit, because you're going to be traveling through vortexes not only to receive of the energies, but also to get from point A to point B to point C to point D. There's a lot of vortexes that you'll be moving through, especially during the initiations.
Time tunnels.
Time tunnels will take you forward, backwards, through time, and also into parallel realities.
How does that connect with time continuums? Time tunnels and time continuums.
Well, the time continuums are a little more complex, you know, because time travel is pretty straightforward in that, you know, we move before, behind, and sideways through time. But time continuums can then emerge from any of those points. So time continuums literally exist in every potentiality within the universe. So there is you know, I like to use the word infinite a lot, but there's an infinite number of possibilities, and therefore there's an infinite number of time continuums. But you can actually end up in a time continuum, and if you do, then you're following one particular strand of time, and how that particular strand is going to play out. You're going to find, though, as you travel through the initiations, you'll be traveling through multiple strands, more often than just time continuums. But the continuums will serve different purposes, because sometimes you're going to buck from one continuum to another so that you can go from one into another, into another, into another, because there's a sequence of events that you need to observe in order to go through some type of initiation. And so these kinds of things can also occur.